So for me, my passion has always been teaching. I've always wanted to impart those skills onto the next generation. I ended up doing a PhD. I managed to eventually do genetics, although it was invertebrate genetics. But now I've come back full circle, working on plants that are related to the bean family, and also now incorporating my genetics into plant research. The whole idea of earning a PhD is that you are able to impart your skills and your knowledge to the next generation of academics. So I've got honors and fourth year students that I'm supervising, masters and other PhDs.
Hello, Africa. You're listening to 1000 African Voices. I'm your host, Aburengwi C, coming to you from our Johannesburg studios. 1000 African Voices is a program that profiles Africans of diverse cultures who have traveled and lived across the African continent and the world. In this series, we will collect and share stories from all parts of Africa. Welcome.
1000 African Voices.
Hello, African. Welcome to another episode of 1000 African Voices. Today, we're joined by Dr. Ethel Phiri, who will shortly introduce herself to the listeners of 1000 African Voices. Hello, Dr. Phiri.
Hi, how are you?
Doing really well. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks.
Dr. Phiri, I actually don't know what's the more appropriate way to address you, but you'll let us know as you introduce yourself. Can you maybe just tell our listeners more about who you are and the work that you do?
Okay, in terms of how you can address me, my students address me as Dr. E. Some call me Dr. Ethel, some call me Ethel, some call me Dr. Phiri. So whatever you are comfortable with is perfectly fine. Because at the end of the day, it's all about how comfortable that person is and what they want to call me. So I'm a lecturer at Stellenbosch University, and I have been in Stellenbosch actually for the past 14 years, even though I started as a full-time academic in January of this year. I do research on indigenous crops. So, yomroho, everything that we are not is not being researched by conventional scientists. I mean, we're still focusing more on wheat and maize, potatoes, but nobody is doing research on diklu, for example, which is Bambara groundnut, which is what I'm doing at the moment. And also I'm interested in looking at indigenous knowledge around subsistence farming. So I'm doing a bit of research in the Limpopo province, because they have a wealth of information and a wealth of indigenous crops that they are still cultivating. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much my introduction.
All right, thanks, Dr. E. I think I like the Dr. E, so I'll go with that. It's always interesting to maybe turn back the hands of time to try and understand how you ended up doing what you do now. Can you just take us back into time, into your early childhood, maybe some of the memories that you have from primary school, secondary school, just so that we can understand how you then got to be Dr. E with an interest in indigenous food?
Okay, so I always, when I tell the story, people always go, wow. So I don't know if it is actually wow for your listeners, but when I was about 4 years old, it was in December. Well, I was just about to turn 5. It was in December, and I told my parents that I wanted to go to school, with everyone that was going back to school after the holidays. And they said to me, no, but you're too young. You can't go to school. You have to wait another year. And I guess I was very insistent because back in that time, anyway, you didn't have to have these long waits before enrolling at a school. So they had, I think, 2 or 3 days before school started. And we went, and I could write my full name, which is a 20-character name, Ethel Phiri, and kind of wowed the teachers that I could do that. And then I had a few tests on identifying animals, girls, boys, whatever, the pictures they showed me. And then they had this little test. I don't know if they still have this test now, where you have to take your right hand and put it over your head and touch your left ear. So unfortunately, I didn't manage because my arm was too short. I don't know what the basis of that test is, but apparently that determined school readiness. And of course I failed, but I had passed all the other tests. So yes, that's how I got to go to school. I'm born in January, so I turned 5 and I started school. But the one thing I remember distinctly is that we struggled to get school shoes that fitted me, because I have very small feet to this day. So I think I was still wearing, baby shoes at the time. So they managed to get some shoes for me in black. And yeah, so that's how my school journey started. And then fast forward, at some point, we had this experiment, or I don't even think it was my experiment. I think it was one of my siblings, where they had to germinate a bean in cotton wool. And I was so fascinated by that, like looking at this bean growing, germinating, getting roots, getting leaves, and then eventually becoming a plant. So I think I spent years finding different seeds and trying to do the same experiments. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. And then only later on to realize that some of them actually require some form of scarification to germinate. So, for example, birds will eat a seed, and then the stomach acids in the bird's stomach will scarify the seed and make it ready for germination. So obviously I hadn't figured that out until my university years, actually. But when I was in high school, I also had a great biology teacher. She was wonderful. She enacted everything. She was animated, and she made biology very interesting. So when I was ready to go to university, I decided that I was going to do, plant genetics. But then I wasn't accepted for plant genetics and ended up doing botany and biochemistry, which was the next best thing. So yeah, that's how my journey started into becoming an academic. I did my undergraduate at the then Rand Afrikaans University, which is obviously now the University of Johannesburg. And spent 4 years there doing my undergraduate, and eventually did a botany honors degree. After that, I decided that I needed a bit of a challenge. And that challenge was doing a master's degree that was a little bit different to what I was doing at UJ. I ended up going to Marion Island. Some of your listeners might know where Marion Island is, but it's halfway to Antarctica, south of Cape Town, about 2,000 or so kilometers south, and spent a year there doing botanical studies and ecological research. And I came back a changed person because it's so much isolation there. And then after that, I decided that I needed to, in order for me to make a change, you cannot just have a bachelor's degree and think you're going to change the world. But in order for me to make a change, I knew that I had to get a PhD. And also when I say make a change, I mean make my small contribution, because science is such a great big world that your little contribution towards the change is literally a drop in the ocean. Yeah, so I ended up doing a PhD. Interestingly, my PhD ended up being in zoology, but I managed to eventually do genetics. although it was invertebrate genetics. But now I've come back full circle, working on plants that are related to the bean family, and also now incorporating my genetics into plant research. So yeah, I guess the dream that I always had took its turns, but eventually I've come full circle and doing what I've always been passionate about.
No, thank you for taking us through that. There's something you said about having to do a PhD so that you could then go on to make a change in the world, so to speak. But when you said that, I wondered what the difference between an MSc and a PhD is. Is it a mindset issue, or is there a significant difference, in your opinion, that a PhD graduate has over an MSc graduate, for instance?
Okay, so it's for people like me, and there are many of us, it's definitely not a mindset. So for me, the title doctor is not me. It's not my passion. But as a master's graduate, you will tend to get people that get jobs more in the technical part of things, because a master's, you learn to master something. So you can master doing research. You can master writing a thesis or something like that. But with a PhD, you have to bring something new to science, or you have to validate something. You have to be a critical and philosophical thinker in order for you to do a PhD. But it's not that as a master's, you can't think philosophically. Obviously, you need to have that same mindset that puts you towards wanting to do a PhD. And also, you don't start off as a critical thinker. You don't start off as a philosophical thinker. It's expected that at the end, you can be put in any position and be able to think and solve a problem, even though that's not related to what you do. So yes, that's the difference between a PhD and a master's.
All right. I mean, I also see on your profile that between 2014 and 2018, you were a postdoctoral research fellow. What is that? What does a postdoctoral research fellow do? So if you don't mind just breaking down how you then spent the 4 years doing that.
Okay, so a postdoctoral researcher is someone who is in transition to becoming a fully fledged academic. So not everybody does a postdoctoral fellowship, but these days when you go into the job market and you want to become, a lecturer or a researcher at an institution, they require at least 2 years postdoctoral experience. Obviously, it differs by fields. So in the natural sciences, you need a PhD in order for you to become a lecturer, whereas in the physical sciences, for example, engineering and physics and all of that stuff, you don't necessarily have to have a PhD. IT is also one of those where you can become a lecturer and not be a PhD, but it's recommended. So with postdoctoral research, well, you're still pretty much unemployed, if I can put it that way. Your salary comes from foundations or the private sector, and you are expected to conduct novel research and supervise students and basically build up your profile. So at that time, I started focusing on indigenous crops, and then that's why I'm in the current position that I am right now. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. I've always been very curious to understand what a postdoctoral research fellow does. So it helps when you have someone who's done it, break it down. And now you are a lecturer. Suppose now when you're a lecturer, it means you are employed, to use your words, and you've been doing that from the beginning of this year. Is it something that you are enjoying, and what kind of skills are required if one is to become a good lecturer?
If I can go back to the postdoctoral research fellowship, I think it's something important that a lot of people think that when you're a postdoc, you are still a student. So they tend to ask you, oh, how are your studies going? How's the postdoc going? And then you tell them, but I'm not a student anymore. I finished being a student when I was a a PhD student. So I think that's something that's important, something that I forgot to say. But going back to your question on the lectureship, basically you require a PhD, as I said before, in the natural sciences. You require a PhD to be a lecturer. You need to have obviously good communication skills because you're going to be standing there talking to students. And it's not a matter of you having PowerPoint slides and then standing there and just talking at them. It's preferred that you are interactive. I also supervise postgraduate students. So basically, the whole idea of earning a PhD is that you are able to impart your skills and your knowledge to the next generation of academics. So I've got honors and fourth year students that I'm supervising, masters and other PhDs. So the importance of a PhD is that you cannot train a PhD if you do not have a PhD. Those are other duties of lecturing. The actual standing undergraduate teaching where you are interacting with the undergraduates. And then another component of teaching is when you are interacting with postgraduate students.
And if I complete a PhD and I desire to be a lecturer, but I maybe lack some of the skills required, you listed presentation skills and really the ability to interact with your class. What happens to me if I graduate, I want to be a lecturer, but I lack the ability to speak in public, and by that I mean to speak in front of my students? What happens? Do I then just stay a postdoctoral research fellow, or are there other posts that I can apply for? I assume there must be, because not everyone is cut out to be a lecturer.
So the thing about postdoctoral fellowships is that you cannot be a postdoc for more than 5 years. In my profile, I was a postdoc from 2014 to 2018. And during that time, I was also looking for formal employment. And I wasn't lucky in that sense because I was mostly looking in academia and not looking in the private sector. So in terms of you, unless you are really, really passionate about becoming a lecturer or an academic, then you're going to have to get over your fear.
Ethel, is there a reason why, earlier you said that you were looking for employment in the academic sector as opposed to the private sector. Is that always been your preference? And do you ever think about jumping ship, so to speak, to try your skills in the private sector? And I say that because the private sector is largely lacking when it comes to highly qualified individuals such as yourself.
So for me, my passion has always been teaching. I've always wanted to impart those skills onto the next generation. I've never been someone that can sit behind a desk and, sign papers or do problem solving is good. I love problem solving, but not from behind a desk. I prefer to be in the lab doing the experiments, outside planting the plants. So I'm a very practical person. But if, there are people that are not like me and prefer to go out, and a lot of PhDs do end up in industry. But also we are becoming saturated. The government wanting, I think, 5,000 PhDs per 100,000 people. I can't remember by which year. But, they want to staff, I think about 40% of our lecturers at all the 26 universities have PhDs. So they want to increase the number of PhDs in academia. But the problem is there's no space for all of us. People are not retiring. They're not dying. And so the people that have masters and the lecturers, they can't be taken off the system because it's illegal to tell someone that, we need to replace you with someone that has a PhD. So those are the scenarios and why it's difficult to get a job in academia, especially for those of us that are passionate. I know a lot of us, because I say us, it's because we were in this limbo of, okay, what's going to happen after we finish the 5 years of postdoc and we still don't have employment. And then others end up in industry, but always wanting to go back into academia. So some of them will get a job at a research council, for example, and then they would still want to become associates or affiliated to universities where they can still co-supervise students. So basically, you're still building your academic profile in the private sector or in government, so that one day when there is a space in academia, you can apply and then possibly get employment that way.
And what is that attraction in academia? And maybe that question allows me to segue into maybe understanding a bit more about Stellenbosch, where I believe you are based. And keep in mind in your response that most of our listeners are primarily in Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, the US. So there are people that are not familiar at all with Stellenbosch. So first, maybe just describe the area where you work. And part of that question then relates to the attraction for you and for your fellow PhD graduates, the attraction that lies within academia.
Stellenbosch is one of the most beautiful places in South Africa, in the Western Cape province, with the beautiful Table Mountain. For me, the attraction to Stellenbosch is not much as an attraction, is that I ended up being in Stellenbosch for the past 14 years, and I was lucky enough for me to get my full-time employment at Stellenbosch University. It is one of the best institutions, one of the top 3, if I could put it that way, institutions in Africa. I actually have a passion for conducting research and having networks across the continent. So I've actually started trying to interact with various people on the continent in the West. I've been doing a lot of research with people in Nigeria, and that is to look at our indigenous crops, to look at generating information and knowledge, bringing that back to Africa, because we have a lot of people that are coming from outside of the continent that are coming here to do research, and then they get credit. So I'm passionate about knowledge generation coming from the continent and its own people. So in terms of that, what draws me to academia and what drew me to Stellenbosch, I've answered that, but what draws me to academia is that I have the freedoms to interact with people, obviously within the bounds that are set by academia itself. But having a PhD, as I emphasize, gives me the freedom to do that. So yes, I can go and say I want to work with someone at Makerere University in Uganda, for example, or Kenyatta University, and then I can interact with those people, and then our university's administrative people will bring us together, and we can just do what we do in terms of research. I'm a multi and transdisciplinary researcher as well, so I interact with people from various industries. And that's what I like about being in academia, is that I have that freedom. I think my brain is not very narrowly focused. I'm all over the place, but within a boundary, if I can say it that way.
No, I totally understand. And I'm wondering as I'm listening, you've been at it, and I say that deliberately, you've been at it for a long, long time in academia, researching, thinking about problems and solving those problems. I'm wondering what you do when you're not maybe supervising students or delivering lectures or writing your own papers. When you say, gee, today I'm really tired, I want to relax and get in touch with myself, do you have any hobbies, your go-to activities that allow you to sort of remind yourself of Ethel Phiri that you were, say, 20, 25 years ago?
You know, I'm still the Ethel Phiri that I was many years ago, because someone said to me once, the second you wake up, before you get out of bed, you are still the same Ethel Phiri that you've always been, until you get off your bed, and then your day starts, and then you become the actor, the person that you are supposed to portray. But for myself, I enjoy reading in my time where I want to relax and get away. Reading, going to the beach and reading while at the beach, and photography. So those are my main. So I'll go to the beach or just go out for a hiking, things like that, so that I can do my photography and traveling.
So traveling, photography, reading, and just being at the beach. I was going to ask whether by photography you mean taking pictures or having pictures of yourself taken, but I think you mean the former. And the books that you read, maybe can you just share with our listeners some of the books that you have read that may have impacted you either positively or negatively? Some books that you can maybe recommend to our listeners?
I don't think that's even possible because I read fiction. I'm a very big fan of Stephen King. I read to get my mind away from what I do every day because my mind's constantly active, constantly thinking of new project ideas, constantly thinking of writing the next funding proposal. So if I can read something that's completely far away from what I'm doing, especially if it's not reality, it's even the best. Even when I read papers, scientific papers, I would sometimes go and find papers in the social sciences and humanities, for example, because that takes me away from everything that I do. So yeah, and unfortunately, I'm not one of those guests that can recommend the best books to read.
No, but I suppose you have answered the question that you read to get your mind away from the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. But I always find it's interesting to ask that question because it allows you to explore a different side of the guest's mind. And besides reading, and you also talked about traveling, and you've already touched on a few African countries. I don't know if you can maybe just share some of the countries that you've been to and maybe some of the memories that you carry with you from those countries.
Okay, so the great thing about being in academia is that you can apply for funding that allows you to travel to various places. So I have traveled to Nigeria, Lagos specifically. I think it's one of my favorite places in the world. It's full of people, but excellent hospitality. You know, I think I've been there 3 times. The first time I was told, oh, don't go anywhere. It's not safe out there. And obviously you listen. And I mean, it was like a 5-day visit. So the next time I went there, my colleague and I decided that we were going to use the local public transport. We were not going to Uber or Taxify. And yeah, we had an excellent time going to the markets. You have to haggle when you purchase things. So there's no way you can just go to someone and say, okay, how much is this? Can I buy it? They want to get you to kind of haggle. So I have been named a Lagosian, honorary Lagosian, because apparently I was able to survive the streets of Lagos. And then another place that was great for me that reminded me so much of South African hospitality and the friendly people was in Mexico. I went to Mexico for a month and I speak a tiny bit of Spanish. You know, the Spanish has sort of dissipated now since I haven't been practicing. But at that time, I managed to go around Mexico in a small town called Cuernavaca. And that town, you got probably like 2% of the people there speak English. So I managed to survive. The hospitality was great. The friendliness. I felt like I was home. I felt like I was in South Africa, just, you know, in another place where they don't speak English. And then I've been at the same trip. I traveled just for leisure. I went to Washington, D.C. in the USA for about 4 days to visit a friend. We actually met while she was here in South Africa. And I said, well, next time I'm in North America, I will come and visit you. So, you know, did a bit of tours in Washington. That was great. I've been to Norway. I've seen the Northern Lights. Yeah, so Zimbabwe. Wonderful, wonderful to travel. Yes. So those are the destinations that I can think of right now. Most of them were for work, but I always had that time to also experience for my own personal tourism type of activities.
I'm glad I've asked the question because up to now, our listeners may have been thinking, gee, this academic work really sounds like a lot of work. Where is the fun? So you started off answering the question by saying you are able to apply for funding that allows you to travel the world essentially. And there's really nothing better than to travel for work, but nothing says when you travel for work, you cannot mix that up with pleasure. So you've really sold the idea of being an academic really well, that if it comes with traversing the globe, so to speak, Norway, Mexico, Lagos, then perhaps it is worth trying. There's something that I found interesting in how you answered or how you spoke about Lagos, the hospitality mixed with haggling, to use your word. I find that interesting because most people experience Lagos as vibrant, loud. Even the people of Lagos themselves will use that exact word. But they'll also say it gives you this energy that you don't get anywhere else on the continent. Then you spoke about visiting areas that reminded you of the hospitality of South Africa. And most of the guests we've had have a different experience when it comes to South Africa compared to, say, the likes of Kenya or Dar es Salaam, where the level of hospitality there is different. So I'm finding it interesting, and perhaps the common denominator in those experiences could be that your personality allows you to enjoy a great hospitality wherever you are. But that's just me making up theories as we go along. But yeah, thank you for sharing your experiences.
Yeah, but if I can say that, I suppose it is my personality in terms of wanting to engage with people, in terms of wanting to learn. And because they see that in me, then they are more open to being sharing and being sort of more hospitable compared to another person that might say, oh, I went to this place and I had a horrible experience. But for me, I suppose personality is definitely the one thing. And incidentally, I did not start off with this personality. I thought I would become a scientist and an academic and be stuck in a lab doing my things. And then I realized that actually, in order for me to do this job, I have to talk, I have to interact with people. But it was mostly, growing up watching TV. And you think, oh, so scientists just stay in the lab and do experiments, but it comes with a lot of talking and interacting with people. So I've had to sort of adjust. And then when you ask me about me being myself, I do then retreat into being myself because you enact. You need to adapt for your situations. So I think I've done that very well. But yes, so when I do take the time to be outside and going back into my comfort zone, I take that very seriously and I enjoy being myself. So that those 2 minutes when I wake up and I'm still in bed, those are the best moments.
Wow. All right. Ethel, it's really been fascinating to get into the mind of an academic. A young one at that, relatively speaking. There's no way I can talk to someone from Stellenbosch and not talk about wine. So when I think Stellenbosch, I think wine, cheese, I think greenery. I am hoping that the answer to the following question is yes, you do drink wine. Is it something that you do maybe?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe just talk us through that. Are there any recommendations you would like to make for our listeners?
Oh my word, there are hundreds of wine farms. So when I arrived in Stellenbosch 14 years ago, I said to myself, oh, I'm going to go to every wine farm and, taste, because you can do wine tastings and do all the tastings that I can. It's 14 years later and I think I've probably gone to about 50 farms. So, but that's because when people come to Stellenbosch that are my guests, I always take them back to my favorite farms. And that has, I never want to risk taking them to a farm that I've never been to and the wine is horrible or something like that. Yeah. So I tend to keep going back to the same farms. Yeah.
50 is a lot more than what most people experience in their lifetime. So you are about 49 wine farms ahead of the average person. And the last question from me, Ethel, because this has really been, as I said, a great discussion and a learning experience in many ways for me and hopefully for the listeners as well. Where to from here? Where do you want to take the Dr. E brand or the Dr. Ethel Phiri brand? Where do you want to go? How does one, assuming that that's on your radar, how does one eventually become a professor? What are the requirements?
Oh, okay. You've just answered my question with your question. So when you first said, where does this brand go? My answer was professor, of course. And there are various attributes that are required. So, for example, you need to have graduated a number of PhD students, master's students, undergraduates. You need to teach. You need to have community interaction. All the things that I thought I would never be, community interaction. I never thought of myself as being one that would go around talking to people or helping out communities. But that's one thing that's very big and important. So in terms of the rigid academia, it's really about how much teaching you've done and how many students you've produced and how many publications you have written out of your research. So that's probably going to happen in the next 5 years.
And for that, we wish you well. We will definitely be following your path. And maybe on that note, those who want to get in touch to learn more about the work that you do, how can people get hold of you?
They can email me at ethelphiri@gmail.com.
So it's ethelphiri@gmail.com. Yeah, I will definitely also put that.
Yes, I'm on Twitter as well.
What's your handle?
At Ethel Phiri _PhD.
Ooh, Ethel Phiri _PhD. Definitely, we will not be confusing that with a plain Ethel Phiri.
You would be surprised how many Ethel Phiris there are on the continent, hey? There are so many Ethel Phiris on the continent. Yes, in Zambia and in Malawi. I'm actually historically, Malawian. So, yes.
All right. So Ethel Phiri _PhD on Twitter or ethelphiri@gmail.com. Or you can just go on LinkedIn and type in the name Ethel Phiri. If you're confused which one is the Ethel, it will be the one with a big bright smile, which says a lot about your personality. So from all of us, Ethel, I'd like to thank you for volunteering your time to come share your story with our listeners. The 1000 African Voices team is grateful. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I look forward to interacting with your listeners if they wish, especially when it comes to research and underutilized crops, orphaned crops, or neglected crops of Africa, because we need to start eating our own food.
100% agreed. On that note, Ethel, take care, enjoy the wine, the cheese, and go out and change the world, because we do need as many PhDs as we can get. So from all of us, take care. Until next time.
Thank you. Bye.
1000 African Voices.
You've been listening to 1000 African Voices. Please join us next time as we bring you yet another African voice. 1000 African Voices is produced by Avurengwi C. Sam Ganich is our sound engineer, with our head researcher Jones Maleka. The intro soundtrack for the show is by the legendary Salif Gator from his 1995 album Forlorn. The song you're listening to right now is by Chronix, and the title of the song is Legend. For more information, including the contact details of our guests, please visit us on our website www.1000africanvoices.com. You can also subscribe to our show on iTunes by searching for 1000 African Voices. We are also available on Stitcher. You can find us as well on Podbean. The only thing we ask of you is that you subscribe to our show by logging on to 1000africanvoices.com and click the subscribe button. That helps us grow. It helps us keep producing and bringing to you more African voices. Until next time, Kungana Africa, and take care.
Being an ordinary person doing what's right. Yesterday at the football game, a little girl asked me my name. She said, "Sir, I've seen you before, tell me who are you?" I said, "I am a legend that you never heard of before." She said, "I am a lion, but you never heard me roar. I am a hero that nobody celebrates, but if one person remembers my name, that means on the ocean of fame I'm an unknown sailor. I'm the percussionist playing with the whalers, the one with the shaker, the mover and shaker. My name wasn't on the front of the paper, but me not cater. Much more than the work is greater. Creation glorifies creator. So all deeds done are in the name of my maker. I am a legend that you probably never hear about. Words from the lion's mouth. I am a hero that nobody celebrates, but if one person remembers my name, give praise, that means I made a change. Story of my life, ordinary person just like you. If you take a look inside, you see the great things that people do. We're out here changing lives day and night, day in, day out. BBC don't show it, CNN don't show it. He's out.